Okay, so a little while ago I showed you a way that you can project an image onto an object from a camera with the camera matched. And I guess you could call this camera projection or camera mapping, maybe even projection mapping, maybe even projection mapping. And there's a kind of a relatively new Blender extension that came out, which is called ProjectionNode from camera. And what it does is it creates a shader node that you can use to do this process very easily. So if I click here and drag this into Blender, I can install the add-on. And what I have in this file is the old bridge that we used from the previous file. And you can see that I've got my F-Spy camera, which is aligned here. And what we want to do is we want to project the image onto the object. So first things first, I need to create a material. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to make sure I've just removed any existing slots. I'm going to add a new material. And then I'm going to go over to the shading workspace. And in the shading workspace, you can see that we have the standard principled BSDF. So if I press N when I'm in this window here, I get this new panel here, which is called camera projection. And you can see that it has an option to choose a camera. Currently I only have one camera in this scene, bridge.fspy, and that camera has a background image, which is also called bridge.fspy. So if you have multiple background images, you can choose them. And so what I do is with the camera and the background image that I want to use selected, I press create image projection node, and you can see that it creates this new node group. And if I were to connect that to the principled BSDF, you can see that now it's projecting the image texture just using the shader onto the object, which is really nice. And one thing you might want to do is you might want to turn up the roughness so that it has more clarity. You don't have that kind of shininess on your object. You might also want to use an emission shader here. So if I put an emission shader, you can see, whoops, oh dear, put it into the volume. Wow, that's quite interesting. Wow, it's like a emissive haze. Anyway, if I were to plug that into the surface, for example, you can see that you get this very clear image throughout the whole object. And you can see here that we can select the background color, so we can choose what is being shown where there is no projection. But you don't have to use that. You can also, for example, if you wanted to have a diffuse shader as your background, you could search for diffuse, and then you could use a mix shader. So if I go here and type mix shader, and then I put both of the emission and the diffuse into the mix shader. Then I use the alpha socket here as the mix value, these around. You can see that now we have a diffuse shader as the background, and we have a emission shader for the actual color of the photograph, which is pretty cool. And so the other thing that's quite nice about this node group that's created is that you can set an angle limit as well. So one of the limitations of other methods is that you get projection onto back faces, but if I set this angle limit to 90 degrees, you can see that we no longer project onto the back, which is nice. We do still project into areas where there are shadows. So you can see here, like this little piece of structural steel, it's still projecting into the shadow, but at least it doesn't project onto the back faces. It's one of the limitations. It also has this feature here, which is called blur edge. As I blur the edge, the shallower angles kind of fade away. And yeah, it's a really nice add-on, because it means that you can have a workflow where you, for instance, you're like in here inside of the camera, and I no longer need my background image turned on. You know, I was just modeling these little metal sections earlier. So for example, I could model this component here. Cursor, do a plane. So the other cool thing is that because we're using a node group, we can layer multiple images on top of each other. So I'll show you how we can do that. What I'll do is I'll create a new camera here, so you can have multiple projections coming from multiple cameras. And I'll position this onto this kind of part of the bridge. And then I'll get, what we'll do is we'll get an image, which is going to be of some graffiti, and you know, we'll set that camera up as well. So let's change the focal length to make it a bit smaller. So say this is where we want our graffiti. So now we've got that camera positioned, we can project that image on top of it as well with the transparency. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here to the camera projection, and this time I'm going to choose the new camera that I made, which I think is just called camera, and the background image it's using is called graffiti. So you can see graffiti is listed here, and then again I'm going to create image projection node, and that's going to create a new node here. There it is. And you know, same as before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect it up to the emission shader, but I'm going to use a mix shader to mix it in. If I tear off this one and then type in mix, get a mix shader, and then I can mix those two together and then plug them in. Now you can see currently they're just faded on top of each other, but what we do is, again, we take the alpha from this new node group, plug it into here, and then you can see that now it's using the alpha from that image to project it. And you can see that the camera is there and it's projecting it kind of like live onto the surface. So you can see how this can be used as a way to do a decal kind of system as well. You can see if I change the focal length, that updates things. Now you'd also see that it's projecting onto this surface as well, because obviously it's going all the way through it. So what you can do, one way to sort of like ameliorate that, just set the angle limit a bit lower. So if I set this to like 45 degrees. Now there is a way that we can also get rid of these shadows, but it's a bit more complicated. So I'll leave it there for now. Okay, so let me show you how to do the volumetric effect as well. So I've got my camera set up here with the basic projection setup. So I'm projecting onto this screen here, as we did before. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select my camera, press Shift S, cursor to selected, and then I'm going to add a plane at that location. So I'm going to go Shift A, add a mesh plane, and now we're going to extrude this plane to make the cone of the volume. So in order to do this, I'm going to use an add-on, which is really useful, which is called Copy Global Transform. So this is one of the built-in add-ons that is not enabled by default, so you can turn it on in here. And if you press N, go to animation. For some reason it's called animation. And I'm going to click on my camera, copy the transform with my camera, select my plane, paste it onto my plane, and now my plane has the same orientation as the camera. Now I'm going to scale down the plane a little bit in edit mode. Then I'm going to extrude it until it hits the screen. And then I'm going to take this face that's at the back of the extruded object. I'm going to scale it down to 0. And then here I've got X-ray mode turned on. I'm going to select this face here, which is at the front of the cone, and I'm going to press SXX, and that's going to scale it on the X-axis. I'm just going to scale it so it's the same width as the camera. And I'm going to press SYY and scale it on the Y-axis. And you can see now we have a cone which matches the throw of the camera. And you can even, if you wanted to, you can parent it to the camera, so that if your camera happened to move, then your kind of volume cone would move with it. And so now I'm going to select that cone. I'm going to go to the shading tab, and here in the shading tab I'm going to add a new material, and I'm going to delete the principled BSDF, and I'm going to create a new principled volume. I'm going to link that up to the volume input from the material, and then I'm going to go back to my camera projection tab here, and I'm going to create a new image projection node. And this is going to be using the video that I had projected onto the screen. So just as before, I get the new node, and I'm going to connect the color input to the emission color. I'm going to set the emission strength to something like 0.5. I'm going to turn off the density. I'm going to set that to 0. And I won't see anything immediately, but if I turn to render view, you can see that now we've got a volume which is representing the same projection that I'm using on the screen. One thing I noticed is that in order to get this working properly with video, I had to go into the node group here, so I pressed tab, and then I had to navigate over to the image node, and I had to set my number of frames a bit higher, so set this to 1000. I had to turn on auto refresh, and if you want the video to loop, you can also press click here. And I'm going to press Control Tab to get back out of that. And now if I play the animation forward, you can see that we get the volume updating with the projection that's going through it.